My father, Raymond, was born on the property which is then known as the Chapman family El Dorado Ranch. He was born in the ranch house along with his two brothers and four sisters. He was the ranch foreman or superintendent, and he held that position for about 25, 30 years at least. My father attended high school after Ford at Fullerton High School. It was they called it Fullerton Union High School because that was the main high school for mostly all of North Orange County. At the outset of the war, December 7, 1941, he was enlisted into the Army and was immediately taken into the Military Police Division. And he was an MP for a majority of his time in the service. He served in Angel Island, which is a prisoner of war embarkation or receiving site. And that's where he spent actually most of his 3 or 4 years in the service as an MP, escorting some of the prisoners of war around the country. They were required to send these prisoners of war, both Japanese and Italian and German, and they were sent around the country to work on farms as laborers. And so he would not only work on the Angel Island, but he'd also escort them around the country in trains. My father told me a very interesting story when he returned about his attempts to get employed in the city he was born and grew up in, specifically Fullerton. He had known an individual who was a superintendent in Fullerton. His last name was Byram. In fact, there is a park named after that gentleman currently in Fullerton. And they had a casual meeting. They ran into each other, and he suggested to my father, have you ever thought about getting a job with the city of Fullerton? Because he was a young man and he was recently married. He wanted to raise a family. So he took his advice, as Mr. Byram recommended that he go. My father took his advice and went to the city of Fullerton. Upon speaking to some personnel, they gave him an application. But when it came time for his oral interview or to speak to whether he could get a job, an individual, and I don't know who this individual was, but my father was clear that he was told by this individual, the city of Fullerton does not hire Mexicans. We have a policy that we do not hire Mexicans. So my father was disappointed, obviously, but he was never a man to hold a grudge. He was not an angry man. So he was disappointed, and sometime later, I'd say probably in a matter of weeks, maybe a month or so, he saw Mr. Byram again, and Mr. Byram asked him, what was the outcome of your visit to the city and getting hired? And my father told him, yeah, I'm sorry, but the city told me that this individual said that the city has a policy against hiring Mexicans. Mr. Byram became very angry at what he was told, and then he took it upon himself. Mr. Byram took it upon himself to go to the city of Fullerton and speak to the individual. How dare he do this to a returning World War II veteran who served his country honorably and received an honorable discharge? And you will reverse your policy. You will reverse the decision. And within a matter of maybe 72 hours, my father was contacted, please return. And he did. The city apologized to him, and the individual was no longer with the city at that point, at least not with that department. I'm talking about the person who refused to hire him. The city then hired my father, Raymond, and wouldn't you know it, he became the first Latino to ever be hired by the city of Fullerton, a distinction that my family is very proud of to this day. After my father spent his time with the city of Fullerton, he was given opportunities, I think, which were unusual for that time, for the 50s, to Latinos. And he had an opportunity him and my mother, who were now raising a young family, to purchase a business, which was a restaurant, bar, let us say restaurant/bar/billiard hall. And he was very worried about it. My mother said, no way. My mother being the very slow, serious, steady one, my father, we can do this. So I think they pulled their resources, put their heads together and decided this is what they wanted to do. And so he purchased this bar in about 1955, and the name of the bar is the El Sombrero Cafe. And after he left the bar business, the restaurant business, he decided to stay active in community events, and specifically with veterans events and veterans affairs. The military was near and dear to his heart. And so he became involved with the Placentia Post 277 American Legion. And he was involved with that organization for, gosh, probably the next 20 years, 25 years, at least. My father was 94 years old when he passed away. And again, he was involved in so many organizations and events, but he just finally, it was too difficult for him, and he passed away, still receiving many calls from these organizations asking for him to participate. If it was a lesson that I learned from him was, you must recognize the lifestyle that you had, how you have arrived to this place in your life. To be thankful, but to understand that to give is better than to receive. It's a worn out phrase, but he is one who lived it. He was very much involved in public events. He gave of his time. He was not, and if you recall, I said he was never an angry or bitter man. I can never remember him speaking ill or holding a grudge. And he said, this is the way you give back. This is part of the fabric of the life that makes your life worth living. And so these are lessons I've taken to heart. And he lived a life exactly as he says he was going to live. The life is proof that he lived he was that kind of person, a giving person. My father had two brothers. The second brother was Maurice. And Maurice was born in 1921, and he was to hear my father describe him, he was one of the most macho kind of guys he'd ever met. And my Uncle Joe, which is the third of the brothers, kept referring, anytime I'd ask about Maurice, Joe would say, now that was a man's man. And he spoke with in glowing terms about his brother. And my father said the same thing. And this was a guy who they thought was going to go far. He was aggressive. He was dynamic. He wanted to serve in the U.S. military. He was the first to sign up as soon as the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And he was that kind of an individual, Maurice was. And so he went right out of high school, basically right into the service. Maurice, now, once he entered the military, he had an opportunity to get into the tank division. He thought that was, according to my father, that this was a great place to be and to fight. And so he entered into training, I believe, somewhere in the Midwest, in one of the camps. That's where they trained tank crews. And so he entered, he achieved enough success in his training, and they selected him to be a tank, what they refer to as a tank pilot. And basically he drove the tank. And he fought, his campaign started in the north of Africa. You've always heard about Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, and General Patton and Monty Montgomery. All these are names or history, but I realized my father fought in North Africa in the tanks under these commanders. And he fought the Nazis through North Africa and Libya, into Sicily, into Italy, into France and Belgium. So his career spanned quite a bit of distance during the war. My uncle, after having fought through a large portion of World War II in Europe, died in November the 5th. On November the 5th, my uncle died November the 5th, 1944, in, we believe it was France, maybe the border of Belgium. Apparently they had come under attack, according to my father and my uncle, who recall some of that information. They came under attack with the Nazis, and the war was still about 9 or 10 months from being over before before the Nazis surrendered. But unfortunately, he was engaged in a battle and he didn't survive it, nor did any of the other members of his tank crew. The Chapman family, in recognition of the sacrifice that a lot of these young 17, 18, 19-year-olds made, he took it upon himself. I'm talking about the original Mr. C. Stanley Chapman. Then commissioned a group to find a large redwood tree, and they located it in the area of Northern California, and they were looking for a particular tree that had a circumference of some 30, 40 feet, and they found one. And this tree was being cut down as part of the lumber industry, and he brought it back. And that original monument, that they then made a monument to all the World War II veterans from Fullerton who died. And that original monument is currently in Hillcrest Park. It's surrounded, there's a wrought iron fence around it. It's blackened, and you can see the names that were carved into that redwood stump. It's beautiful, but the ravages of time have really taken its toll. But this was given by the Chapman family to the city of Fullerton. They have then since erected a more modern war memorial that includes all veterans who have died from World War I to present, including the Middle Eastern conflict. The new monument is made of granite, and on that monument is engraved my Uncle Maurice Juarez's name as one of those who have fallen during World War II, along with a few other men from Fullerton, something about maybe 30 or 40 names. The irony of this monument is that it was erected across the property where he grew up on, where Maurice grew up on the Chapman Ranch, as I described earlier. The monument was erected literally within eyesight of where he was born as an infant, grew up as a young man, entered the service. He never came back, but it's almost as if he's looking down on his birthplace, where he had all these memories of his brothers and his sisters. This is, I think, it's such a beautiful, life has a symmetry, and if it does, this is an example of it.